I remember going home on Tuesdays early to write up these summaries to give to the store managers, telling them these are sort of all the rules and these are all the things we've agreed to. And here's who you should call for this. And I swear to God, they just took them and shoved them in a drawer. And no one cared, right? No one cared what we just committed to until there was a problem. And then they cared a lot. So it's like, why don't you just set yourself up for success by understanding what you've committed to and fostering a good relationship with your landlord so that when shit happens, you're not being given a default notice. You work things out because of the relationships that you've built.
In a corporate world where all employees have great leaders with no egos that create fun cultures where people can do their best work, the employees and companies thrive while doing great things for the customers, themselves, and each other.
Well, we know that rarely happens. I'm Jeff Palacio. I have been a leader for over 40 years for every t-shirt size company, from small 16 employees to extra large over 1 million. Please join me while I interview outstanding leaders that will share stories of great leadership and not so great. It will help you become a better leader while poking fun about all the crazy shit that happens in corporate America.
Hi, I'm Joe Deshawn, and welcome to the Corporate Couch with Jeff Palacio. Today, Jeff is interviewing Elizabeth Souder. Elizabeth is the founder of What's Next Biz, a consulting company enhancing workplace satisfaction and performance through alignment. Prior to founding What's Next Biz, Elizabeth had been a corporate attorney for a variety of companies in the Kansas City area. Elizabeth has a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and Government from Grinnell College and a law degree from the University of Kansas. You can learn more about Elizabeth at whatsnextbiz.com. Let's listen as Jeff talks to Elizabeth.
Elizabeth, I want to welcome you today, the day before Thanksgiving 2023, to the Corporate Couch.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so Elizabeth and I worked together. We probably were in a fair amount of meetings during the startup days of Sprint PCS, but we got connected through Nick Giuliani via LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Nick was kind enough to say that I was one of the people Elizabeth should meet with. So we had a great conversation at Jinky's Hangout, 151st and Antioch. And no, I do not get any kickback on that. So there you go. Yeah, so no, excited to talk to you. We had a great conversation. And I usually ask a fun question that I come up with, but you and I had some post email exchange after our coffee, but you're famous for what song reminds you of this, or your first concert.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
So
here we go. So what song comes to mind when you think about your middle school, junior high days?
Oh, wow. Okay, so that would be Rapper's Delight. I knew all the words. I probably still know many of the words. And some Kansas songs.
Carry on.
And then my first concert was Fleetwood Mac Rumors tour in 8th grade.
Nice.
So that I played that.
Wow, you went big.
I did. I got really lucky. McNichols Arena.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
How about
Boston, no, More Than a Feeling.
I love Boston.
Yeah, that was my first album that I went and purchased. Sticks, Pieces of Eight. Oh, see, now I'm just gonna start going.
All right, how about Junior Prom? What song?
Junior Prom was Putting on the Ritz.
All right, there we go. One last one. What song reminds you of your college basketball experience?
Gosh. Well, Don Henley was pretty big during that time, but I don't think that was on our warm-up tape at all. Gosh, it was probably Beastie Boys.
There we go. Love it.
Yeah.
So you grew up in Colorado Springs, I believe?
Yes, I
Yeah.
did.
So what was fun for you growing up? What did you love doing?
Well, I love the timing of this question is so perfect because I just had coffee this morning with um, a woman who we walked to school together every day from third to sixth grade. And so we were reminiscing about we were part of that generation in the 70s and 80s that just ran out the door, at dawn and came back when the street lights came on. And we were, just talking. She has three kids, I have four, and we're saying, gosh, did we ever let our kids do that? Just you're on your bike and you're off and someone feeds you along the way and you go climb trees and get into trouble and come home, you know?
Yeah.
So it was a very, it was a very freeing and fun childhood. I think I was describing myself as an outdoor dog because I just, anytime I could be outside was a good day for me. Um, and obviously sledding and snow and all the mountain stuff you can possibly imagine.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was good times.
Yeah. How far did you walk to school?
Oh, good question. Um, it was we were talking about that too. So it was about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 blocks, probably like big city blocks, but
Yeah.
you had to go across a really busy street, still is a busy street, and they had an underpass. So there was an underpass that
Wow.
would go under the street. Not all the kids took it because it smelled pretty bad,
Right.
to be honest, under there. And it was kind of creepy. We think, oh wow, we'd have an after school activity. We walk home, it'd be getting dark, and we went through that underpass. Like Pam and I were just talking about that. Like
Mhm.
that was kind of creepy that we did that.
Right.
Um, but and we rode our bikes to school
Yep.
many times. But we played games. Like we played this game called Pig, and if the sidewalk square had writing on it, you had to jump over it or you got a pee, and
How funny.
so I think it probably took us, half an hour to walk to school just because we're always
Right.
messing around.
Yeah, I think back. I walked to school first grade through fifth. That was elementary school for me, and I don't know. I maybe it was 3, 4 tenths of a mile, maybe a half mile, but like I couldn't even see my kids walking that. I mean, I'd be like, "You're not
Right.
walking this." I, but I digress. But you're right. It was the era.
No.
We would go play a lot of sports, and everything was, the less organized. I mean, I didn't play. I played my first organized sport was Little League, and then that at 9, and I didn't play organized football till seventh grade, and I didn't play
Right.
organized basketball till seventh grade. But it was
Yep.
all pickup, after school, and we changed with the
Yeah.
seasons: football in the fall, basketball in the winter. Um, and
I think it was so important and I actually just listened to Steph Curry on a podcast talking about this, that it's important that we play more than one sport. This business of kids just doing one thing over and over. I mean, the repetitive stress injuries and you're not using the other muscles in your body, So I'd swim in the summer and then I'd, you know, run track or play basketball or volleyball in the fall and basketball in the winter and then track again and soccer. I played soccer. I'm not good at soccer, but I did it because it was
right,
fun. Probably
yeah,
the only thing I didn't do was softball. That was not a thing
right,
here. I guess we did more skiing kind of stuff, but we just didn't play softball. So when I joined a lawyers league in law school, because they all thought I was athletic, oh, for sure you can play softball. I'm like, I'm not an implement sport person. And sure enough, I showed them I am not an implement sport person.
and implement mean like
Like look, if you put a bat or if you put a racket I mean, I'm good with when I'm touching the ball, right? Yeah, yeah.
oh, funny.
But I had the running bunt, so I could bunt and run really fast,
Yeah.
but I never got the ball in the air.
So I have to ask, since we're in a a similar age demographic and you're competitive, have you played pickleball yet?
I have played
Okay.
pickleball.
I just
Yeah.
want, so that's a wrap.
I
Yeah.
I have figured that one out.
Okay.
Yeah. I enjoy it.
It's kind of like a adult size ping pong.
Ping pong, exactly what I say. Yeah.
Um, what aspirations did you have an aspiration as a child? Hey, when I grow up, I want to be this. What was this for you if
I
you had?
didn't it wasn't that, so my whole family, extended family included, are either like Episcopal priests or teachers. And all I kind of knew is I didn't want to do either of those things. Um, I danced ballet for a long time until I was told I was going to be too tall. And so I had these aspirations of performance at some level that didn't ever go anywhere. I guess I ended up performing on the basketball court instead. But I wasn't singularly focused on one thing, which I think has sort of played out in my life, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think that being open to whatever else, but I also didn't have a lot of modeling about what else you did. Like I didn't know what a business person did. I didn't understand what
Right.
does that mean,
Yeah.
right? I knew what a doctor was, I knew what a lawyer was, but
Sure.
I didn't really know what else there was.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you go to college, Grinnell
Grinnell
College.
College is
Yeah.
small college in Iowa.
Yeah. So what was the thought process behind being a political science and government major?
It was actually the first class I took in college that I absolutely loved. Like it was finally, it was that aha, oh my gosh, I think it was de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. And I was the geek sitting in the front row raising her hand because I was so excited to talk about this
Yeah.
topic. And, I'd taken history and I'd taken religion. I did enjoy my religion classes, but um, it just there was that spark. I think that was it, and I was just hooked. And I remember I didn't declare my major until, and I think someone else that you've interviewed said this too, until like the very last day of my sophomore year.
Hmm.
Um, and I ran across the campus chasing down Professor Strauber, who, by the way, I'd never met. And I said, "Would you be my advisor?" And he was known as being this, he was from New York. He was a total hard ass. He was a really difficult professor. And I think he was just flabbergasted that I was asking him to be my advisor. I mean,
Yeah.
it was pretty funny. But no, I absolutely, I love that. I love the study. I wrote my thesis on the SALT II treaty. It's like, oh
Wow.
my gosh, the stuff that it feels very irrelevant at this time, but
Yeah.
it was, yeah, I was all in. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. What do you have a like a political figure that's a hero to you, or that you really admire?
Wow. I do go back to the founding fathers. I go back to the James Madison and
Mm,
um in the Federalist Papers, and just I like reading about the vision of America and
mhm.
the idea of it, because it's, the further you dig, it's a fragile concept upon which this is built. It was an idea, it was just this idea that was born, and it had, like I said, a lot of fragility to it, and complexity, and there were people that were very concerned um, with the direction that it would go. So it's, history informs,
Yeah.
right, the present. And um, I like those supporting figures, I feel, in history, and even in leadership. I like to know the Harry Hopkins as opposed to the FDR. Like, what was it like to be in that room? What was it like to be that advisor?
Right.
Because that those are such critical um, characters.
Yeah. No, it's great. I mean, yeah. I mean, if you go back and I think Walter Isaacson did the Benjamin
Oh
Franklin.
yeah, Benjamin Franklin,
I mean, it's
fantastic book.
fantastic. I mean, just the brilliance of the founding fathers. I mean, really
Yeah.
was just, special. And we can get into a divisive conversation that people,
Yeah.
with, Jefferson owned slaves and what, but
Right.
what,
Right. I
really
mean,
the
they're
concept.
flawed.
Yeah,
They're
right,
as flawed as the rest of us. Guess
right,
what?
right. Yeah,
So, but in just yeah, in terms of the discernment and the diversity of opinions, and yet look what happened.
right.
So,
So you're a competitive person. I think that's fair to say.
yes.
So I did a little research. You're still on your college list of that. You have the third most steals in a game, 9. You're the 17th leading all-time scorer, and fifth in rebounds in the game, and fifth in rebound averages, average per game 7.8. So where did you get your competitive fire as a
That's
child?
probably always it's most definitely from my father, I think. My dad, I grew up, my dad was a professor at Colorado College, taught British history. But what I remember the most was going when he played faculty basketball. And my dad actually had a false front tooth because he like got elbowed
Uh,
and then he would also dislocate his shoulder and he would just like literally pop it back in because he was just very very competitive. And I don't think that that's something you can necessarily be taught because it wasn't something I was, you see these parents on the sidelines today and you're like, oh my gosh, my dad was insistent that my brother and I not play basketball until I think we were 10. I think he was just he either it and it my brother was benched by my dad for poor sportsmanship. He was not allowed to play the next game.
oh
So my
wow.
dad was very competitive, but he also had very high standards. Like there was none of that nonsense, happening
Yeah,
on the
that's an
court.
interesting. I would just say most parents of that generation would have been more. I would think the majority of them would say that you're going to play sports and kind of live
Mm.
out their dreams through their children. A lot will do that, so that's an interesting concept. What do you think made them a little different there?
Um, Probably his own upbringing, I would imagine, was had a lot to do with that. And then I think also that recognition that he also wanted, look, back then there wasn't any of these smaller balls either. Everyone just played with the
Right.
regular sized
Yes.
basketball.
Right.
And he didn't want us to develop bad habits. So, a kid shooting that big ball at that hoop, you're going to be shooting it off of your shoulder so he was very very specific on fundamentals. Like I'm sitting right outside the the basketball hoop in the gravel driveway. By the way, this is not a paved
Uh,
thing,
oh yeah.
and you had to deal with like the funky bounces. But he we'd lay on the floor and do backspins, with the ball, so we understood the right form. And um, so he was very particular about ensuring that we knew the fundamentals.
Interesting. Yeah, that's great. So you graduate. Tell us about your first job out of college and how you got it.
My parents gift to me my when I graduated from Grinnell was a one-way ticket anywhere I wanted to go, except home, which was their way of saying you're not coming home and staying in our basement, which I think was maybe something what was happening. I don't know when we all graduated, but um, so I moved to Boston. I had an aunt and uncle. They had 4 kids, and they invited me to stay with them in Cambridge. And I just thought I've never been lived on the East Coast. I've never lived anywhere but Colorado and a year in England. And I thought, okay, let's just try this thing out. So I got hooked up with a recruiter and went on an interview at Mass General Hospital and ended up working for a gastroenterologist in his office. And it was, it was an interesting first job. It was one of those where I was sort of the office manager slash secretary slash, and I ended up doing a bunch of clinical research for him, compiling some studies, and um, taught myself Lotus, which I think was the precursor to
Oh, wow.
Excel,
Yeah.
and Lotus was located right across the Charles River from the hospital. And I went over there and got some training. And
Oh,
so
wow.
that's what I used to compile. So it was the first, and what I think, if I look back on my career, it's just okay, this is the job that you're paid to do, and then these are all the other things that you do as a result of it. And after a year, I realized that I was a Midwesterner. There was no way I was ever going to fit into Boston. Um, it was a great town. I had great friends, but I was not an East Coaster, and I didn't want to keep doing that. Right? I knew I needed to find something else. It was funny when I left. They threw a massive party for me. This was a So all the nurses from the unit came, and all the other doctors and the fellows, because it's a teaching hospital, and they gave me this trophy, and it was the hard ass award.
Wow.
So I was known as a hard ass, which I just think was hilarious, because what did I know? I was this kid
Right.
out of college.
Wow.
um,
You impressed them.
so it was a great experience. They
Yeah.
sort of let me like take it into different directions, and yeah, and then I study for the LSAT, went at B, and I went to BU. I remember it's like the seventh floor, and when we finished, we all had to get on these elevators and go down, and all these idiots are talking about the test, and I'm like, shut up! I just want just want to get out of here. I applied to law school in Colorado and Illinois and KU. Um, my advisor gave me a list of schools to apply to, and KU gave me the most money. And I had a friend from growing up in Colorado Springs who was at KU for law school, and another friend who was at CU. And my friend at CU was miserable, and my friend at KU was having a great time. And the law school was right across the street from Allen Fieldhouse. And
There you go.
KU had just won a basketball championship. So wasn't a great, I was like, I'm all in.
Right.
But I never for a moment, Jeff, thought I was going to stay in Canada.
Right.
I could maybe get to the plaza by the time I graduated, but I really just it
Right.
was the furthest thing from my mind that I would still be living there.
So what made you go to law school?
Honestly, couldn't think of anything else to do. Like, I got this poli-sci degree from this liberal arts college. I know I can do this sort of, but I didn't really know what else to do. And I remember having a meeting with my advisor before I graduated from college, and talking to him about law school. And he said, unless you really want to go, don't go now. Go do something else. And that was probably the best advice I
Yeah.
ever got, because my parents had just gone right into graduate school, right? So
Right.
they were a little confused, like, why aren't you go get your master's or go continue studying poli-sci? And I just was like, I know I don't want to. I thought that was only going to lead me to teaching, and I didn't want to do that. Um, so it was sort of a default thing. I wish I could say it was like some
Right.
massive life ambition, but it wasn't.
Yeah, and in a couple of our email exchanges, you talked about high school and kind of being a learner, but you weren't intellectually
Yeah.
curious. So, but obviously, when you're deep in a 3-year law program,
Yeah.
it's all about studying. And did your habits change from like high school to
Yeah,
law
so
school
that's a great
to
point,
college?
because you're right. I didn't love school. I wasn't an intellectually curious person. I think I did well in school because I was competitive and I wanted to win, you know. So I studied enough to do well, but really until I got to that poli sci class, I that that spark hadn't been there. The thing about law school is it's teaching. It's interesting. My second child is now at 1L at University of Colorado, so I'm sort of reliving that experience through her. But it's so much more about teaching a new way to think, and that felt very natural to me. That discerning view, I call it, the the chess board, seeing the whole board on and anticipating moves, and so that issue spotting and analytical thinking and drawing out an argument and reading a case and coming up with a counter argument and reading there's something very sort of logic games about it, which felt so different than just learning the subject itself, right? So it's as if it's teaching you to think like a lawyer while learning about torts or while learning about property. And the expectation that you're going to walk out of class remembering all those rules, it's less about that than you know that there are rules, and you know that there are these exceptions, and you know to look for them. And you sort of know how to build a case, or you know how to build a contract, and you know you can anticipate what a good outcome looks like. Which feels very much like sports, right? It feels like there's this tactical element to preparing for a basketball game, right? Or preparing to play basketball. And then the coach kind of sets in motion what the strategy is going to be. And it's not always the same. And the same thing doesn't work every time. And that's the law. And that, to me, is sort of one of the reasons I became, I don't know, disillusioned is the right word for it, but this commoditization of the legal profession, as in you can just go to LegalZoom and print out a contract. It's just it so misses the point. There is an intellectual element to it, and it does require some knowledge and customization, and there's a reason that there are professionals that are trained to do it.
Yeah. One, I love the law school lingo, 1L, that's cool.
Yeah.
But I have a deep legal, philosophical question for you, so I hope you're ready for it. Who is a better attorney, Harvey Specter or Mike Ross?
Oh my gosh.
You don't have to. That's
no,
a Suits reference for all those people who are not watching
but
Suits.
Yeah, I like the Mike Ross version a little better, but
yes, yeah, well, good.
Harvey's not bad.
Donna's my favorite character, though, as we.
Of course. See, that's the most important. Let's talk about who really runs that place.
Right.
It's Donna.
And actually, close second is the other assistant, Charlene, not Charlene.
Charlene, yeah.
Charlene, yeah. They're both great. Anyhow, see, we go everywhere on this podcast. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Great question.
So you graduate, get a local attorney position in Lawrence. Tell us a little bit about that.
I worked for this great guy. Law jobs are a little tricky to come by in the early 90s. And by then I was dating my husband, which is a whole nother story. But Dan Watkins was a solo practitioner. And it's again, one of those, God, the universe, everything moments, because he sort of practiced law so that he could do the other thing. He was very politically connected. He ran Slattery's campaign, I think, for governor and senator, Kathleen Sebelius. So he was very politically connected. He was also, I think, president of the chamber. So this law thing was something he did to support his 4 kids and his family. But he was just, I learned so much from, talk about integrity and really being of counsel to his clients. And we got to work on this fabulous project where I'm going to date myself once again, as if I haven't already 95 times. We were in charge of the land acquisitions for the South Lawrence traffic way, what's now sort of K10 loop around to I-70. And that was a fascinating project because we were, negotiating with landowners to try to avoid eminent domain proceedings. But then the Haskell Indian Nations University also had a great deal of land that was impacted. And so there we got into some really interesting sort of EPA and Native American issues and negotiations for relocating wetlands and sacred spaces for them. So it was one of those projects that was once in a lifetime, and now I get to drive on it all the time and
Yeah.
think, oh,
Yeah. Nice.
I helped make this happen. Yeah.
So coming out of law school, what was the biggest surprise actually working for practicing law? What was the big surprise?
Yeah. Well, first of all, as everybody knows, law school has nothing to do with preparing you to practice law, right?
Yeah.
It does a great job of preparing you to teach it, which is why all the people that do really, really well in law school they just go right back and start teaching it again.
Right.
So it is there. Yeah. So now we're talking the practical side of what is it? And this is, I mean, early days of Westlaw and internet kind of like we're still in libraries looking at books. And
Right.
so when you talk about writing a contract, you're literally starting with a blank piece of paper and and building it out. So it's a lot of research. I mean, I think that's pretty common when you first come out of law
Right.
school. Is you really do learn how to research pretty well in law school. So that's sort of becomes your job primarily, and I think that's true regardless of where you work, whether you work for a big firm or a prosecutor's office or solo practitioner like I did. I think what was cool about working for Dan is that the type of work was so varied. We also helped build the Tanger outlet mall, and then we
Uh-huh.
helped, let contracts for highway projects. And then for that same company that owned the highway projects, we helped them get their kids out of jail when they got a DUI. I mean, it was
Yeah.
it was all
You did
over
everything. Yeah.
the board. You just do it all, which is fabulous because
Yeah.
then you realize you can, there is that fake it till you make it, but
Yeah.
you make it and you
Yeah.
make a difference.
Yeah, so then you go on, and we share this common experience that we've talked about. You go to Sprint PCS as a corporate attorney. Tell us how you got that job from a small
Yeah. So this is
solo. Yeah.
another Dan Watkins. So I I applied for this job. I think it was actually in business development because they're still building out the legal department. So this was and the hiring manager recognized Dan's name on my resume as a reference. I mean, that's how this stuff happens,
Yeah.
right? So um,
There
I
are
went
no
in for
coincidences, right?
there are no coincidences. And then I think Bernie liked me because I was a lawyer,
Right.
which I thought Bernie was the most terrifying individual ever, but he cultivated that
Yes, he
that
did.
air of
Yeah.
and he laughs about it now
Yeah.
whenever I see him. Um, so yeah, I was hired to negotiate the first 72 or whatever 120 I think it became leases for retail stores, because back then, the idea of a phone company having a storefront was no unheard of. We had to have a presence through which to sell these phones. So I was made a part of that retail store team, which let me, I worked with people in finance and marketing, and I was on that team with the architect and the real estate agents, and um, that was such a fun time. It
Yeah.
really, I mean, you were there. It was
Yeah.
it was definitely, and before, while when I first joined, they were still building out that team. So I got put on different kinds of assignments, and I remember I had to. Bernie came to me and said, "I need you to go to Fort Worth tomorrow and negotiate a tax abatement for our call center." I was like, holy shit, I don't have any idea what if, and
Right.
again, no internet, no
Right.
Google. It's like, so I'm
Yeah.
going home and like combing through anything I can find. Okay,
Right.
what am I going to do?
Yeah.
So the next thing you know, I'm on a plane the next morning with someone from the call center group, and we go meet with these people, and apparently we got it. I can't
Right.
really remember the entire
Yeah. Yeah.
conversation, but I remember I came back and
Yeah.
ran into Bernie. He goes, way to go. Way to
Yeah.
but you
And it
just
was a
did it.
huge call center. It was.
It was a huge call
Yeah.
center. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was just that, dive in there. If you've got common sense, and that's another thing. I think I've told you this too. Al Kurtz, who is, I think, our COO, I chased him down one evening saying, Mr. Kurtz, I need someone to sign this lease. I don't know if the amount is way over my pay grade. And he said, well, you look like a smart gal. Why don't you figure that out? What do we pay you for?
Right.
And so I went and found someone in finance and said, can you sign this? And I said, sure. And, but the idea was, let's just go get this shit done and not worry about bureaucracy and policy and whatnot.
I've worked with a lot of chief legal officers, but you're the one we had, Joe Gensheimer, was probably the
Yeah,
funniest chief legal officer that I've
he
ever
was a
worked with by far.
character.
Great
Yeah,
guy.
Joe is famous for walking around in his stocking feet,
Yeah.
and just popping into your office and putting up his feet and saying, "What the hell are you doing today?"
Right. Yeah. But he was a good guy. Good guy. Good person. So, what was your big takeaway from a career perspective at PCS?
Oh my goodness, I absolutely love it was so creative, the fast pace, creativity, ability to innovate, really being open, and the idea of building something out of nothing. The one thing that I that always kind of bothered me, I will say this about PCS, was there so many Sprint people that were there, and they ended up sort of biting off, I don't know, their nose to spite their face. They made a lot of technology decisions based on, let's not do what Sprint does, instead of like what's best for the company. And
Right.
I found that sort of emotional, just toxicity around let's not be Sprint was so like,
Yeah.
where did you think this thing was going to end up, folks? Like,
Right.
in what universe wasn't Sprint PCS going to eventually be part of Sprint? And then we're going to spend all this time and money undoing all these
Yeah.
technology things. But
Yeah.
um most of I mean, I met some of the most amazing women there. We just formed our own little wine group. Like, I think I was married, but didn't have kids. And,
Right.
we had this really innate, I think you knew, you and I do it, right? You worked there. Okay. You know what that felt like. Those
Right.
were heady days
Yeah.
of building out a network, and I guess just literally getting shit done because we had this great product, CDMA. I still remember sitting in a meeting and saying to somebody, like, totally truthfully, what is a T1? And they about fell out of their chair like I was some
Right.
sort of idiot. I'm like, well,
Right.
why would I know what a T1 is? I'm
Right.
doing CDMA,
Right. That's funny.
yeah,
Yeah, and we talked about, I mean, it's in 1995 dollars, it was a $10 billion
yeah,
funded startup. I still think it's the biggest of all time. So just
yeah,
crazy. Um, so you leave there after about 10 years. It comes into the Sprint fold. I think we talked about it.
yeah,
It just wasn't the same environment, right? So you wanted to kind of move on and
yeah.
you do so.
I wanted to move on, and it was, again, this was, I think I left after the Nextel deal, and I mean, let's be honest, like, the so much of the value and the fun and everything we built at PCS was just, had been so poorly managed, and um by the time Sprint took over, and it was sort of disheartening. I think it I will say I had some great experiences working for the local division. Harry Campbell was one of my clients, and there were some really fun, innovative things going on in local, which sounds funny, like a
Yeah.
local carrier having innovation. But yeah, I think I'd reached the end of the road at the time of the Nextel deal, and it was all around the time of sort of Sarbanes-Oxley was coming out, and I had been in a series of CLEs, continuing legal aid classes, and learning about what these new SEC requirements were going to be, et cetera. And the meta guy, who was a lawyer but acting as a COO for a small company in Olathe. And I remember saying to him, just don't put me in a room and make me negotiate the same contract over and over again, and I'm there. And guess what? That's what they wanted me to do. And I said I actually had spoken those words. So
Yeah.
I didn't last long there.
Right.
And again, by then I had 4 kids. I ended up sort of taking a year off, not intentionally, but it just sort of happened.
Yeah.
But in that year, I helped start a couple of local charities. Charlie's House is one of them. I think the other one's defunct. I sat on some boards, and one of those boards went through a series of issues with its executive director. The organization did, and so I and a partner from Blackwell Sanders at the time rewrote that we got into the bylaws. The bylaws had not been touched since the 60s. They'd been amended 1,000 times, and as I feel is true with any of those sorts of amendments and or policies themselves, they are nothing but a roadmap to everything that went wrong in the organization. And it was time to, turn a new leaf and determine what this organization was going to be like going forward. And so after that exercise, Britain said, "Hey, if you're ever interested in coming in house or coming to a firm, let me know and I'll set something up." And I didn't take him up on it right away. I kind of sat on it for a while, and finally, my husband, I think, said, "You're working a lot, but you're not making any money. Would you care to make some money?" Sure.
Subtle.
Right, very subtle. And so on this very snowy, I so remember this distinctly, on this very snowy January day in 2008, I went to Grand Street Cafe and had lunch with Jim Ash, the head of the corporate group at Blackwell Sanders, and my friend Britton Gibson. And we just had a conversation. And so this is something I tell young people and anyone out there interviewing all the time is don't think of it as an interview. Think of it as a conversation. It really was an
Yes.
exploration into
Yeah.
what are you looking for? What are you looking to do? And again, I was able to say, look, I've got 4 kids. I really enjoy picking them up from school at 3 o'clock and being a mom. But I also want to work during the day and get paid for it. And I don't want shit work. Like I don't want that job that you give to the part-time working mom, right?
Right.
I want a meaty real job.
Mhm.
And so they said, "Great, let's figure that out. Let's make that happen." And so I started working there, and like as soon as I started working, they merged with Hush and Eppenberger. So that was another very interesting, like this is my gajillionth merger now I'm living through.
Right.
And so I know I helped them with some integration stuff and here and there, but what really happened was in the fall of 2008, the economy crashes, and I get this email from Jim Ash saying we need someone to track what's going on in Washington. Will you be that person? And I said, hell yeah. Right. So once again, I'm just throwing myself into this. I didn't know anything about banking law. I had no idea. But I remember calling IT and saying, I need 2 monitors because I need to watch what's going on C-SPAN and like write memos for our clients and our other attorneys to understand what this crisis is all about and what's going to happen. So that just sort of became my job, right? I became the sort of special project, support attorney, for issues of the day, and that turned into the Economic Recovery Act, turned into the Dodd-Frank, and so all of that just led to more work and trainings and keeping people apprised of what was going on, and the organization itself was going through its own changes, right? It's trying to figure out what it's going to be as Hush Blackwell. And so that was also very interesting to be a part of and to watch that all emerge because they went through some dramatic changes in the 11 years I was there.
So you have a 11-year run at Hush Blackwell, and then you decide to be the start your own business. What's next biz? Kind of what walk us through that process and
Yeah.
what was the catalyst to drive that decision and
Yeah.
what you're going to do?
It
Because
was
you're a lawyer really by trade, and
right.
what you're doing now is very interesting in terms of, how you're trying to help companies and individuals.
Yeah. It's it in my mind, of course, it all makes perfect sense. But I get it that it's why would you stop? Believe me, I got that question. Why would you stop being a lawyer? Um, and it's not that I've stopped. I'm still licensed. I still do stuff for clients from time to time, but I just don't market myself really as a lawyer. But this idea of organizational health, getting back to all those mergers that we lived through, you and I did, and I, lived through it at Hush. There was just always this lack of attention to what are we doing with these two cultures that we're bringing together. That these business combinations that no one, and I'll never forget asking one of our managing partners at Hush after I think it was 2 or 3 years after the merger, saying, when are we going to talk about this? When are we going to address the issue that Hush was a very different place than Blackwell, and we're having a hard time here. He said, oh, we're never going to talk about it. It's too hard. Like that's the hard thing. And the same was true with the Sprint Nextel merger, right? I
Oh,
mean, two completely different cultures. I mean, it was true with Sprint PCS taking over, merging into Sprint. I mean,
mhm.
the kinds of things that were being said about each other during that period. I mean, again, you cannot make up how petty some people were and about one way being better than the other, and it was so emotionally charged, and yet they didn't want to deal with it because it was emotional. It just didn't make sense. um so there was that component. So there was a sort of corporate culture component to it. There was also, and this really goes back to the beginning of Sprint PCS when I was negotiating all those retail store leases. And this is just an example, right? But I remember going home on Tuesdays early to write up these summaries to give to the store managers, telling them these are sort of all the rules and these are all the things we've agreed to. And here's who you should call for this. And I swear to God, they just took them and shoved them in a drawer, and no one cared, right? No one cared what we just committed to until there was a problem, and then they cared a lot.
Right.
So I was like, why don't you just set yourself up for success by understanding what you've committed to and fostering a good relationship with your landlord, so that when shit happens, you're not you're not being given a default notice. You work things out because of the relationships that you've built. But if everything is so disconnected and no one really is looking at aligning what we've committed to through the operations. I mean, the number of times, Jeff, that I would be working with billing when I'm negotiating a contract and saying, can we even do this? Can we even meet this obligation?
Right.
And they say there's no way in hell. And then the product people are saying, but we have to say that to get the deal. And anyway, the lack of alignment, right? The lack of alignment between who we say we are and how we're behaving was just, it was eating at me.
Right.
And through a series of sponsorships that the firm had done with like startup communities, I'd gotten involved in several organizations, and through that learned this area of organizational health. And I read Patrick Lencioni's book, The Advantage. And in there, he's highlighting companies, many of which you've talked about on your show, like Southwest Airlines, and where they just have success because they are attentive to their core values, and core values being really the behaviors of an organization. We all have personal core values. Well, so do organizations, whether they like them or not, right? So why not be intentional about them, and then have them operationalize them into the business. In my experience, culture had been those things that HR was responsible for, and we had like Red Friday and Chili Cook-Off, and that's our culture, right?
Right.
But to really be authentic, I thought you really, this idea of operationalizing the core values, make the right thing easy, right? If this is the behavior, this
Mhm.
is who this is what this company, this organization represents, who it is in the community, and how it's distinguished itself from its competitors in a way that mean that the reason you work for AT&T and not Sprint is why, right? That you're drawn to that. I always say, hey, look, Jack Welch, GE, they had a culture. You knew exactly what you were getting. It wasn't one in which I would choose to work, but it worked for a lot of people.
Right.
So you can choose to as long as you're doing it with intentionality and authenticity, that's fine. It's these ideas of we're going to be everything to everybody, and we're going to be the best law firm and hire the greatest lawyers and attend to our clients. Well, guess what? That's what they all say. What distinguishes you? Why would someone want to do business with you over another firm or another company? And make that your distinguishing characteristic, and say no. Say no to the misaligned vendors and client opportunities. And over again, both at Sprint and at Hush, I had these experiences of trying to convince my senior management to say no to something because it was only going to crater us or distract us. And also at the leadership level, this idea of transparency. I mean, I cannot tell you how many wasted hours occurred at Sprint every single time there was rumors of a layoff or rumors of an acquisition or rumor. I mean, the lost productivity was staggering. And I'm thinking, these are real dollars we're talking about, people. And it's all, it's so avoidable. I think at the end of the day, I felt like so much of this was avoidable, and it was like money just laying on the floor, waiting to be scooped up and put back into the business. If we could have that alignment and that authenticity and that transparency, people wouldn't leave, right? Your retention and all those issues. If you could just please walk consistently, and it embraces this idea of organizational health. So I developed a program so wisely in 2020, and then the world shut down. And so I did a little pivot for a year. And then in October of 2020, sitting around a fire pit at a friend's house with like 5 other women. We'd all kind of done these pivots, and we were all kind of talking about what we were working on. And I said, I really want to help organizations operationalize their core values. And this woman sitting next to me turned and said, oh my gosh, we have to talk. She had just opened up her own pediatric, she'd separated from her partner, opened up her own pediatric dental practice, and with the desire to have a values-driven organization. And she said, I've been working on this for 6 or 9 months, and I don't know how to do it. And I said, well, let me help you, because I've got this program that I've laid out, and let's go to lunch. And sure enough, she hired me. And it was a fantastic experience, because here I had a leader who wanted to do this. Right. I mean, that's the best client, right? Is the one who wants to do what you want to do for them. And so together we really walked through this for a year. And within a year, she opened up another office. She went through part of that process. Of course, when you say that, we go through the values identification process and verification, and then you start to operationalize them, people are going to leave because it's going to freak them out. And that's fine. You want them to make that decision rather than you making it for them. But so they deselect it out, and then that makes room for the aligned people to come and join. So that was such a fantastic experience. And then I learned a lot through that process, and I got more clients as a result of that. And then I started, that sort of developed into some leadership coaching, because you can't really just do the organizational health piece in a vacuum. You have to get leadership on board. And a number of leaders who would say, oh, I really want this. And then you'd start working with them, and it turns out what they really wanted was for you to go fix their people. That's not, they've got to be willing to look in the mirror and accept the fact that whatever is ailing them at the moment, it probably has something to do with their own behavior and some of the choices that they've made. So that became a natural, and then, great friends like Linda Endicott and Harry Campbell and Andre Davis. And I mean, they they've just been great mentors for me in developing this leadership development part of what I do.
Yeah, I think it's so key, and you talk about a lot of things. When there's an information vacuum, people fill up the vacuum with their own, thoughts
Mm,
of what's happening, and they're, 80% of the time they're wrong. So and you're right, the
exactly.
waste of productivity. I was involved in one. I started with a company about 8 weeks before a big merger acquisition got finalized, and it was a counterexample. I mean, a successful merger acquisition because the cultures were so similar. So it was Beringer Ingelheim Animal
Mm,
Health and Fort Dodge Animal Health, and I had just started, so I never met any of the regional sales directors until the day the day after it was finalized. We all met in Kansas City, and people were coming in from all over, and I didn't know who was a Fort Dodge person and who was a Beringer
uh,
Ingelheim because the
wow.
cultures and the people was so that's example of a successful merger. So yeah, I love what you're doing and the culture thing, and because nobody thinks about the culture thing, it's all about the dollars and the
Yes.
synergies, and nobody looks at the culture. I'm like, yeah, probably should look at that. Like
First, I
yeah,
mean, it should be
right.
one of the first things that you
Yeah,
evaluate. What's going to be the impact on
yeah,
this? Um, because
yeah.
we're
Do you
forming a
help?
new organization.
Yeah, do you help companies prior, like evaluating is this a good merger, or it's after the fact now they have two
Why do you want to
cultures?
do this? Well, so I've done this in a couple of different
Yeah,
ways, not as frequently as I would like,
yeah.
but I get one of the first things I did was I came up with a founders agreement,
Hmm.
uh, and that I just made up on Survey Monkey or whatever, and I would just give it out for free
Yeah,
to founders to say, like, this needs to be your prenuptial agreement, right? You need to have these
yeah,
conversations now, because so many times, you know those that initial capital infusion that a startup gets, it just goes to lawyers because the founders are bickering, and they're fighting, they go through business divorce and the
right.
whatever, right? Or they don't hire properly. And you just think, if you were intentional with this founders agreement, or just having a founders conversation, and the best answer was sometimes, we're not ready to do this. That's so much better than spending all the time and money to create something when you really aren't aligned from the very beginning of
Right.
this relationship. And there's been one company that actually, sadly, I kind of had to fire because they had two different people. One of them said they wanted this, and one of them really did want it, on either side of the deal. And I just felt like I was just taking their money, and they weren't listening to
Right.
anything that I had to say. And I don't feel good about that. And
Yeah.
that's
Sure.
not a good result for anybody.
You take your own advice. You say no when
Yes,
Steve
exactly.
Steve Jobs was famous for that. One of his strengths was being able to say no to the greater
Hmm.
good, right?
Yeah.
What was your biggest surprise moving from a kind of corporate law and then working for a major law firm and then starting your own business? What kind of the first 6 months?
Whew.
Oh shit!
All
I
the
didn't know this was going to
Holy
happen.
shit, all of the stuff that you end up having to do. And I was never very I'm such a doer, and I have this very specific ideas in my mind of how I want things to turn out, that that the idea of hiring anybody to help was was really hard. But I've read that book, 10x, your success, and in order to 10x your business, you've got to stop doing 80% and look for ways to delegate. So I think that's probably been the hardest thing to let go of some of the marketing stuff. Now I love to get rid of my billing stuff, but that's my own fault, because I just hate the the tediousness of all of that I stay up until 3 in the morning, like once a month, to make myself get through it.
Right.
Um, so that organizing piece of it. Um, but I love the work. I love doing the work with the clients. I find working in the business to be a challenge sometimes. But then this way, these trips, people laugh all that I come to Colorado so often. I said, you don't know how much benefit my clients get from me on those drives, because I am just sitting there constantly
Yeah.
thinking of, or listening to a podcast, and it makes me think of a client or think of a situation or think of an article I want to read. And so I leave myself these voice memos and I get wherever I'm going and do a data dump. So it's kind of therapeutical to have these long drives when I can just zone out. And hey, it's an easy drive. Very few people are
Well, it's funny you
driving
say
easy
that
with.
because in your email right before our conversation today, you referenced the song Colorado by Daniel
Yeah.
Rodriguez, which I had never heard of before, but a great lyric. I actually wrote it down because I thought it was fantastic, but it's, the great American meditation, which is
Mm-hmm.
driving, like with,
Yeah.
but, you think about your best ideas come when you're running or in the shower
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
the reason why is your mind is most relaxed. So
Right. That makes
you're more
sense.
creative, so you're getting the ideas. So yeah, your clients definitely have benefited
Yeah.
from those long
Oh,
drives.
they're all used to getting, voice text from me
Yeah,
in the middle of nowhere. Hey, I've got this great thought for you, or
yeah,
I'm working through that problem we talked about. Here's an idea.
yeah. So Elizabeth, as you know, I love to help two groups of people. The first is
Yep.
recent college graduates. They're going to get ready to take their first post-college job, and what would you say to them in terms of getting that great first job and starting your professional career?
Yeah, I think going and talking to people. I mean, as we were talking before we started recording, the people you have as guests are some of the most generous, genuine, nice, friendly people. And I absolutely would have no qualms about telling any of my kids, you know, call up Mackie, call up Angela, call up Harry, and they all of them will take your call. They'll all take your meeting. They all are just generous people that want to share, right? Their wisdom and their ideas and their thoughts. And then don't be afraid to just take a job just to find out what it's like. And it's okay if it doesn't work out.
Right.
The greatest thing that I think that Gen Xers and younger have done is to say there's no one path. There's no one way to do this
Right.
thing called a career and a life. And it's start somewhere and then be prepared to pivot and learn how to leave a job. I'm very proud of the fact that I've left a lot of jobs, and some of them are really good jobs that people thought I was crazy for leaving. But I always did so with in the nicest way possible. There were never a burned bridge. It was all very open, and it was just time to move on.
Yep.
And I remember getting to that point at Sprint when I said, and I was felt like I'd been banging my head up against a wall, like, why don't they appreciate, or why don't they see, or what? And I finally stopped and said, wait, they get to be who they want to be, and I get to be who I want to be. And if it's time for us to go separate ways, then that's okay. They're not bad. I'm not bad.
Right.
I'm not an idiot for leaving. They're not a bad place to work, right?
Right.
It's just we've reached the end of the road. And I think so oftentimes, and I don't know if this sort of the 1950s kind of mentality of like you just got to grind it out for 40 years at the same place and
Right.
that's honorable. I think the great news is that for people nowadays is you can carve your own path anyway. But
Right.
I always say, go and talk to people, go and hear other people's stories. It's going to make you feel better, because
Right.
everyone's career path is messy and all of it contains some bullshit right
Right.
along
Oh
the
yeah.
way. And if you reach that juncture and you're not sure what to do, don't talk to your best friend and your mom and your dad and your husband. Go talk to somebody who's been through shit
Right.
like that.
Yeah. 100%. The second group is now you're a leader, or you're have people
Mm-hmm.
under you and you're responsible for in the org chart. As these people begin their leadership journey, what advice would you have for them?
So I, like always go back to my athletic life and the idea of coaching. And I know coaching is received it means a thousand different things to people now. It feels very blurry. But when I think about a coach, I think and I like to break it down by words. I cultivate. So you begin by cultivating the foundation of trust, because unless there's trust in your organization, it it's not nothing's ever going to work. And I think, again, I've said his name a thousand times, but Harry Campbell always had this habit of he did walk around management, right? He just walked around and got to know everyone, and he tells everyone his story first. And that vulnerability based trust of a leader, to then cultivate that trust among their people, is critical. Then you optimize. You got to optimize your team for their success, and that's in the processes and the operations and the structure. Right? Does the structure serve the team? Do we have the right people in the right seats on the same bus? And then you align that. You synchronize those processes and operations with those core values. If they're not aligned, they're not going to withstand, right, when shit happens. And then you catalyze them by in their performance, by having through clear expectations. Clarity is tantamount. You've got to have clarity, and then shared accountability. And then the last H is harmonize. So always be harmonizing, that continuously foster a balance of collaborative environment where diverse talents and voices and perspectives are all part of the conversation.
Right.
And because that's how you innovate. You've got to be able to, all the time be innovating. The only way we can do that is we have a diversity of voices that we're listening to.
Well, Elizabeth, I'm so glad that we got back together after being
Yes.
in many meetings. You're great, and I can't wait for our next coffee or walking
Yeah.
meeting. So thank you for being on
Likewise. Yes, we've got to do the walking meeting.
walking meeting. Yeah. So thank you for being on the corporate couch today, and have you and your family have a great Thanksgiving.
Likewise. Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving.
It was so fun to reconnect with Elizabeth. So, we worked together at Sprint PCS, as you did, Joe. But yeah, I mean, it's which was, really one of the, top 3 career experiences in my life. So it was fun to reminisce about that. But, stuff I didn't know about her, I love that her parents got her a one-way ticket for, she had $800 for a one-way ticket anywhere after college. She decides to go to Boston. I can't even remember the firm she worked with, but she left and to go to law school and got the hard ass award at her first job out of college. Navigates, goes to law school, so that was fun. And I asked the very probing, law question on who's a better lawyer, Mike Ross or Harvey Specter, on the show Suits. But what I loved about her lawyer experience and her law school, but I liked how she explained it. So she was being a lawyer, you saw the whole, she said, chessboard, and it taught her a different way, a new way of thinking. And she was self-admittedly not that good in high school and college. She was just competitive, so she wanted to get good grades, but she wasn't a curious learner, she said. And then she navigates into Sprint PCS, and then they merge with Sprint, and then she works for one of the biggest law firms after that, after Sprint, Hush Blackwell. But she took a year off, not on purpose, she said. And she was very clear of what she wanted. I want to work for Hush Blackwell, and I think it was one or the other, because then they merged while she was there. But because she goes, but I want to leave at 3:00 to pick up my kids from school, but I don't want to work on shit work. I want, and then she got into these projects, that were special projects. So she was in the Dodd-Frank era and the Economic Recovery Act. So she became experts on all. So I like that. And I think it's great advice for people,
be clear about what you want, because you're going to be happier if you go that direction. What about you, Joe? What did you take out of the conversation with Elizabeth?
Oh, she revived so many memories of working at Sprint PCS. It was an amazing time to be there. Matter of fact, I'm reminded of the great Dickens quote from Tale of Two Cities, where it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. That's exactly what working at Sprint PCS was at the time. It was an interesting entrepreneurial experience because on the one hand, we had whatever resources we needed. And if we didn't have them, we could just go out and get it. So if you needed some piece of software or needed a piece of hardware or needed a new disk drive or something, just go down the street to Best Buy, pick one up, bring it into the office, and boom, it was there. Nobody worried about who was going to sign for any purchase orders or expense reports or anything. It was amazing the amount of money that flowed through there and the amount of authority that everybody had. And she talked about that a couple of times where she was talking about how she was negotiating real estate deals at the time and how she was apparently given more authority than I think that she realized or she thought that she deserved at the time. But that's just how that experience was. It was a different kind of entrepreneurial experience than the classic entrepreneur experience. It was more of what we call an entrepreneurial experience because Sprint was assuming the risk. Sprint was providing the resources. We were only responsible for the results that we created as a result of those resources. And it's different than a pure entrepreneurial relationship where whatever resources you have that you have to spend is essentially your own stuff, your own personal stuff. And so you've got to be a lot more resourceful about it. It was an interesting experience. It was interesting to relive some of that with Elizabeth and look back on those times. That was fascinating part of my life.
Yeah, I mean, when I was employee 55 there in 1995, and our burn rate per day was $1 million. That's what we spent per day.
I'm not surprised. And you and I spent a lot of that personally ourselves.
Yeah, mainly on lunches.
Just
kidding if you're auditing us here. Joe, based on that and Elizabeth's great career, what leadership advice do you have for our listeners today?
Today we're going to go to that great anthropomorphic philosopher named Hobbes, who's a stuffed tiger owned by a boy named Calvin. Hobbes once said, "A 15-second television commercial exceeds the American attention span by a good 14 seconds.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Corporate Couch. If you enjoy the podcast, I would love for you to take 2 minutes out of your day to rate us 5 stars and write a review. Please join me next week to learn from another great leader sharing their professional journey and insights.